Jesus more.
Dear brothers and sisters, whenever I come across this text, I always have a smile at the end because it brings very good memories of our time in the seminary when we are doing the defense of thesis. I think I shared this one time here, but I can't help it to share again. Like when we were having our defense of thesis, and that would be the last thing that we were required to do in order to obtain your philosophy degree. So when we came for the defense, so there will be professors sitting right in front of you, 3 of them. So you have the timekeeper, the moderator, and the reader. And you have your paper right in front of you. And then right behind you, your classmates, your friends, even at times your family members. So it's a very tense moment, but also very interesting to see how people go through their papers and they defend it. And you'll be required to say a verse at the beginning of the text, at the beginning of the presentation, and then at the end of everything, you'll be required also to say a verse from the scriptures that you like. And when you say that, then that is the end of everything. So you could see how creative students are during that time. So for instance, you would be required to say something like, John chapter 14 verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Or to say, John chapter 3 verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So finish like that. But it depends on how the defense went, because at times it's very difficult. And that's where you find how creative students would be. For instance, you find a student say, John chapter 11 verse 34, verse 35, and Jesus wept. Or others who say, Mark chapter 15 verse 34, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have thou forsaken me? Okay, things like that. But this is one of the ones that I remember at the end of this gospel reading, where we hear, at the end of this, he says, and no one dared to ask him any more questions. I remember this student very well who really, after his defense, he said, Mark chapter 12 verse 34, and no one dared to ask him any more questions. And then he made the sign of the cross and left. Because that is the only opportunity you have to give back to your professors. Because after that, there are no lessons, there are nothing again. You are just waiting for the results of your papers. So you get the opportunity to say whatever thing you want to say. I still remember one of it, really. It was very interesting. And said, Psalm 118 verse 10, the nations all encompass me. In the Lord's name I crush them. They compass me about. In the Lord's name I crush them. They compass me about like bees. They blaze like a fire among tongues. But in the Lord's name I crush them. And he's speaking to the professors like that. And they have nothing to say because they have tried to crush the teacher, the students. And the student is very good with his defense. But so I could not help this, because when I read this, I remembered a student who said, and no one dared to ask him any more questions. But my dear brothers and sisters, in the text of today, which we have heard many times, we hear the scribe asking Jesus a question. But you see, in the end, it ends with, when Jesus saw how he answered with understanding, then he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom. This is the man who asked the question. But in the end, Jesus saying, after he had answered, so who is asking and who is answering? Did he ask the question and he answered? So this is and I want to talk about the dynamics of this text more than what is written in the text itself, what is happening within this text. This man comes to Jesus and he asks him this question, which is the greatest of all commandments? And Jesus says what he knows already. He says to him, hear, O Israel, because this is Shema Israel, Deuteronomy chapter 6, from verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, is Lord alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. and with all your strength. This is what Jesus says to him, but then he puts in another thing that is not there in the Shema Israel. Because after this, the Shema Israel, there is nothing more. It only says, you must repeat this to your children. You must recite it when you are at home and when you are outside. You must recite it when you rise up and when you rise. You must put it on your forehead, tie it on your arm, and you put it on the doorpost. That is what Shema Israel says. It does not say anything about the second part that Jesus says. He says, and you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now this is something new. And that is why this man goes back and recites the same law, but adds what Jesus has said to him. He says, yes, Lord, you are true. Well said, Master. You are right in saying that he is one Lord, and that you must love him with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And it says, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that there is nothing more than that. Now when he says this, actually Jesus has led him to the truth. Jesus did not give him the truth, but he led him to the truth. He gave him what he knew, and he added what is so important for him. This man reciting this over means that he has really followed the path that Jesus has laid out for him. That is why in the end, Jesus is the one saying, after he had answered with understanding, he said, you are not far from the kingdom, because he has followed the path that Jesus has laid for him. And I think this is a great important meaning and a lesson for us, especially during this period of Lent, that we are following in the footsteps of Jesus, the path that he has laid for each and every one of us. 1 Peter chapter 2 from verse 22. Jesus died on the cross for us, giving us an example that we must follow in his path. He died for sin, giving us an example that we must follow in his path. That no deceit came from his mouth, nothing, even when he was insulted, he did not insult in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he handed over to the one who judges justly. That is what St. Peter says. But that we must follow in that footsteps of Christ. St. Paul says in letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 5, that we must put up the very self of Christ. We must resemble Christ in every way. Therefore, when we are going through Lent, it is not like we are having an experience of Jesus and we leave him outside there. No, he is laying up a path for each and every one of us to follow. The path of suffering, that even when we go through suffering, we must be able to hand that over to the Father who loves us so much, because he is one Lord. And it therefore says, a summary of all the law, that we must love God in everything that we do. It doesn't matter what we are going to do today, the fasting, the prayer, the almsgiving, all that we must do in the name of God. Everything has to be according to the way God has laid it out for us. Therefore, we are not just doing to please ourselves. Whatever thing we do in this Lent, we must do for the greater glory of God. And this is what Jesus has laid down for us, and we must follow in his path. He carried the cross to teach us how to be truly human, that we will go through all difficulties, but we must submit to him who judges justly, him who judges with mercy. Therefore, as we go through this Eucharistic celebration, let us ask God for the grace to remain faithful to him in following in his path.
Kiss us, mother, kiss your children. Bring God's blessings from above. With your mantle blue enfold us in your gentle holy love. See the darkness dissipating.